Welcome to Beyond the Matrix with Rod Bryant and Jerry Gordon, here on Israel News Talk Radio. Unplug, strap yourself in, because you are about to move beyond the Matrix.
You have officially arrived. This is Rod Bryant and, of course, my co-host, Jerry Gordon. We're reminding you that we are live streaming this show on YouTube at Netiv, N-E-T-I-V, online. One word, Netiv online. And when you get there, you'll find one of the channels is going to be called BTM for Beyond the Matrix. Jerry, we have a great show lined up today. As a matter of fact, another good show coming up next week. Sort of addressing the issues that are going on with coronavirus and also trying to keep our listeners informed of what's happening with Iran and Israel, with Syria, just to kind of keep everything sort of open flow of information for people to know what's going on. The big question that we have, though, is the coronavirus going to curtail Iran's proxy war machine? And it's something to talk about.
Well, it's clear that Iran is amongst the world's most afflicted with the coronavirus, but also its coronavirus has taken down some of its significant leaders, both in the IRGC and in the malacracy, as we call it,
right?
The death of a senior Ayatollah this past weekend.
And I understand that we haven't heard from the president of that country in a couple of weeks as well. So we really don't know. There could be a lot more of the top officials sick or have died that we may not know for a while.
But it hasn't put a dent in the revenge attacks in Iraq,
right.
That have killed both U.S. and British and even Iraqi soldiers and wounded dozens.
Right.
And it behooves us to find out why the U.S. Army hasn't essentially installed decent anti-short-range rocket and missile.
Right, because they haven't any. They had the Iron Dome at one point, actually have one of those batteries available, but they haven't deployed it or used it anyway. And that's the big head scratcher on our part. So guys, don't go away. You're listening to Beyond the Matrix. We're going to have Stephen Bryan on. You know the guest. You know him well. And just want to say thank you to those people who are watching on YouTube at Netiv Online. We'll be right back after these very good messages.
Good.
Okay, excellent.
And by the way, video quality with that new picture I put up there is terrific.
It is really good. Okay, yep. So I'm going to pound this out and we'll wrap it up, and I'll send you the audio file.
Yeah, and I've got the title for the teaser.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, and we're going to go, so give me a second. I want to put this on. We're getting ready to go into the first segment with Stephen Bryan. Stand by. Where this came from? There are reports that the IRGC generals and Ayatollahs are among the dead in Iran. We said before the show that probably not enough, but at the same time, do you think that this is going to have a serious effect on their ability to continue the proxy campaigns against Israel, et cetera, and in Syria?
Well, you know, it's interesting. Today, Lebanon announced that it was closing its airport. It's international airport, which means the Iranians can't get there any more than anyone else, right?
Right.
I would imagine that it won't be long before Baghdad closes its airport because they're afraid of the spread of this disease. The problem is that, as you know, is that it's not easily contained, particularly in places where there's not very good social organization, let's call it that.
Right.
Which certainly is the case when you get to Iran. That's what it looks like to me. Or similarly in Iraq, or for that matter in Lebanon or Syria. So yeah, I mean, it's possible that this thing could get way out of hand in those places because they're disorganized.
Jerry?
Steve, the U.S. has had, until this past weekend, close to 90,000 in forces and bases in the Middle East and in South Asia. What anti-rocket and short-range missile defense systems do these bases have, if any, in these recent attacks?
Well, we don't have any. There was an announcement this morning that the United States is rushing, if you want to call it that, rushing Patriot batteries to Iraq. But the Patriot's not designed against short-range rockets and Katyushas. The trajectory of a Katyusha is completely different from a ballistic missile and or an aircraft even. So whether the Patriot could be effective against those kinds of attacks, I think the answer is it can't be. It may be okay against bigger stuff, but the Katyushas and those Grads and all the other stuff that we're talking about, the answer is no. I think the answer is no. So we don't have anything deployed at all right now, and the Patriot's not going to solve the immediate problem. The other factor is that Patriot's an extremely expensive system to operate.
Oh yes.
The missile cost in excess of $1 million each, an interceptor missile. So, you're firing at a $1,000 rocket with a $1 million payload. It's not a very good. You can be bled financially before anything else.
And primarily, those are high altitude defense weapons.
Well, they're not that high. I mean, a few thousand feet, something like that. They'll start. I mean, if you look at what all the examples we know of where the Patriot has intercepted something, it's usually in something you can see very easily, which means it's 2,000 to 3,000 feet up, not much more than that. That's one of the weaknesses of the system is it doesn't catch them early enough. Right. It waits too long.
Steve, with that in mind, the U.S. Army is allegedly considering ending a proposed $1 billion buy of the Israeli jointly developed Iron Dome system.
Well, they canceled any further purchases of Iron Dome. I don't know if it's $1 billion. I mean, I doubt that. But they canceled. They bought 2 systems, and then they canceled any further purchases. So that's the actual situation. Today, the Air Force was, the Army was saying that, well, they have it, but they're not going to deploy it. It's incomprehensible. It's absolutely incomprehensible. Here's a system that could defend our bases. We have a couple of them. They could be deployed right away. And they're throwing every excuse they can think of up there to explain their irresponsibility. But I think it's irresponsibility. That's the key point. There's no reason why these couldn't have been put at our vulnerable bases in Iraq. Absolutely no reason.
What was all of the discussion about codes that Israel was not willing to share certain?
Yeah, well, that's a different discussion, but it's connected to the same issue. The Army was demanding from Israel that they turn over the source code for the Iron Dome system, and the Israeli company Rafael said no. They wouldn't.
That's a programming issue, correct?
Well, it's the logic, if you want to call it that. It's the logic of the system and the databases of the system that make it functional. And it raises, the U.S. never exports source code to anybody.
Right.
Period. Full stop. We don't do it. I don't think Israel does it unless there's a specific special version of the software they might export for some particular reason. So to make a long story short, the Israelis declined the request. The question is why the request was made. There it gets murky. The Army is saying, well, we want to integrate it with the larger system and we need to have the source code. Well, you don't need the source code to integrate anything. All you need is an API, the ability to connect.
Right.
That's all you need. You don't need source code. So it raised the suspicion that this was an effort to steal the information behind Iron Dome.
Right. I wonder sometimes if contractors might have a play in this whole thing.
Well, I think they
like
do.
Raytheon, like okay,
Well, the only player here that matters is Raytheon,
right.
because Raytheon, is the Patriot builder, and Raytheon wants to get the contract for a new system if one is authorized. Nothing's been authorized yet.
Right.
But the Congress has pointed in the direction of wanting an integrated system built on top of existing platforms.
Right.
And so it's likely that one might get authorized. And I think Raytheon, as you know, Raytheon is a partner of Rafael in Iron Dome.
Right. Right.
But it's mostly for the missile itself, which is the interceptor missile that's part of the system. And what it looks like is that what Raytheon provides is largely the sensor.
Got you.
The rest of that missile is probably made in Israel, I think. So the amount, it's called Tamir. The missile is called Tamir. So the suspicion is Raytheon wants a bigger piece of the action.
Right.
But there's no evidence, there's no proof, but they've done it before. I mean, in the past, there was a very ambitious program called MEADS, MEADS, the Medium Altitude Air Defense System that was a partnership between Raytheon, Lockheed, the Finmeccanica in Italy, and I forgot who in the UK and in Germany. MEADS was a very ambitious program, and Raytheon, which made the Patriot, saw it as a threat. So they ganged up with the Army to kill it, and it was killed.
Wow.
The U.S. backed out of it after spending a couple of $1 billion.
The interesting thing is they have been talking since I was in the Army, in air defense, about this integrated system, and yet it's still not materialized. I don't understand that. That's been,
well,
back in
the Army the Army believes in what's called layered air defense.
Right.
Which means, low altitude, medium altitude, high altitude, slow flying, fast flying, supersonic, hypersonic. They want a total package, which means that they'll never get one.
It's true.
In my opinion.
Oh, right.
I mean, because you can't do that. It doesn't make sense.
Right.
So,
they've sat on the proverbial Santa Claus lap of the Pentagon and made their wishes that they're probably not going to get.
Well, they always do this. It's a typical Pentagon attitude. They always want more than you can do.
Of course.
And then they end up settling for far less and be done.
That's the art of the military deal, right?
But the secret sauce is it has to cost more than $1 billion or it ain't worth it.
It's not worth it. Exactly. Hey, guys, we're going to have to go to a break, so stick around. You're listening to Beyond the Matrix here on Israel News Talk Radio. We'll be right back with Steve and Brian after these messages.
So, Stephen, you want to resurrect a discussion that we had about Boeing and the infamous air refueling plane debacle?
Well, it has to fit into a context. I mean, the context is, I think that's a bigger question. We better leave it because we'd have to get into what's going on with Boeing. And
All right, so let's leave that pass.
It's a bit tricky.
Yep.
Not that I don't think it's important. It is.
So in the second segment, it looks like we want to concentrate on Erdogan's machinations across the Mediterranean and whether or not it got handed its head by Putin last week.
Well, it's got handed something. I'm not sure it was his head.
I thought it was a dead fish.
Right. You know what? I need to also remind the audience that we're recording this and it'll be on YouTube. So remind me when I go into the break, I need to throw that ditty in.
Well, in what sense? What do you want to? Oh, you mean you want to remind it?
Yeah. I want to remind. If I don't mention it, then let me know. So
okay, all right.
Let's see. We're almost there.
So do you put the video on YouTube as well?
Yes.
Yes, we do.
We're starting to do that. Yes.
I should have moved that damn thing there.
Well, you have an assistant in the room. She can move the dolly out of the way.
That's right. And
Well, now it looked funny if it was.
Yeah. And we're recording the breaks. So
She wants union wages, by the way.
okay. Union. Wow.
Yeah, high price. High price.
She went straight there. She didn't even beat around the bush.
Next time I'll dress, more elegant.
It's your elegance of speech we're interested in.
Oh yeah, right, sure.
Stand by. Let me render this one more time here. Just okay. Stand by.
So you want me to lead off with the turkey armed drone stuff?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, you guys that are watching it online, just let us know. Give us your input. If you would, if you're interested in this, at least make a comment. Let us know if you like the video, you don't like it, because we're just doing this as a beta test right now. It's going to be available on the TiVo Online. Of course, if you're watching it, you already know that. So stand by. Here we go. Well, doggone it, I did it again, guys. I have to render this thing again. Hold on.
I hope you say
I know how to render his chicken fat.
Schmaltz.
schmaltz.
Schmaltz. Yeah.
There was a famous New York restaurant on Lower East Side, Ratner's, that would serve Romanian steak, and in the center of the table was a big container of schmaltz.
Of course.
Oh man.
I went to the hospital because of schmaltz.
Did you really?
Yeah, really. I made it myself. I went to the Eastern Market on Capitol Hill and bought chicken fat and skin. When I didn't even buy it, they gave it to me. I said, well, you don't sell this, you take it.
Ribbons.
I took it home and I made schmaltz and gribbiness, and I got a big challah and I ate it. And an hour later, I was laying on the floor in absolute agony, and crawled to the phone and called the doctor. And he said, what happened? I said, I don't know. He said, well, what'd you eat? I said, schmaltz. He said, oh, for Christ's sake. He said, you've killed your gallbladder.
I was going to say your gallbladder had to have taken a hit on that.
I said, what do I do? He said, lay on the floor.
Lay on the floor, don't move, right?
Don't move. Don't go away.
Okay, here we go, guys.
Okay.
Step up, stand by, everything quiet. Lie on the floor. Okay, here we go.
Welcome back to Beyond the Matrix, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
We are back from the break. I'm Rod Bryant, Jerry Gordon, and Stephen Bryan. We're talking about some of the latest information from the Mideast, what's going on with we just finished talking about the Iron Dome batteries that were allegedly refusal to give the source code to the Army or to the Department of Defense, and it's sort of been stood down. Jerry, you have a line of questions you want to ask.
Yeah, this segment, we want to concentrate on the wily Erdogan in Ankara, who has made a hash of things in Syria and elsewhere. So, Steve, Turkey is apparently using armed drones in the battle against Assad in Idlib province. And also there's a related issue about whether or not those drones over the U.S.-held oil fields in eastern Syria is also being attacked by Erdogan's drones. So what can you tell us?
I don't have any information that the oil fields have been attacked by Turkish drones, and I seriously doubt it. I imagine that's part of the same attacks that have been run by ISIS and by other dissident groups in Syria, using I call them armed drones, but they're basically normal drones that they hang some grenades on, and then or RPG warheads, and they try to crash them into things. That's rather different from what the Turks are using. The Turks are using a pretty sophisticated armed drone using the missile called UMTAS, UMTAS, or sometimes it's called Mizrak, MIZRAK. It looks a lot like the Israeli Spike missile. And I won't say any more than that because I don't know. But it looks a whole lot like the Israeli Spike missile. It's made by a company in Turkey called Roketsan, Rokestan. It's a very capable missile. And that's what the Turks were using along the Syrian border in their drones. They also use it from helicopters. So they have it on both. The rack on the drones, I understand, came from the UK. I mean, there's a lot of issues about this, but the main point is it's a pretty good sized precision guided missile. It's 160 millimeters in diameter, and it weighs 37 kilograms, almost 38 kilograms. So it's a pretty lethal missile. The other, it's also fire and forget, which is sophisticated rather than have to be wire guided or visually guided. That makes it also more formidable. And one of the features of it, which is very much like Spike, and I don't know anybody else that has it, is that you can change targets in mid-flight.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a feature of Spike. I think it's likely connected to Spike in some way. Let other people explain how. But there you have it, and it's quite a good weapon.
So let's see. Erdogan has been acting pretty dangerously in his search to control Idlib province, including trying to invoke NATO Articles 4 and 5.
Right.
For nothing more than 36 dead Turkish soldiers. So what's going on there?
Well, Article 4 is just a consultative article of the NATO agreement. So it just says that if any member asks for a consultation, they'll have a consultation. It doesn't require a vote. And he actually asked for Article 4. There's no chance. Article 5 is the collective security provision. That means that if you're attacked, if one of the members is attacked, you can ask the other members for help to deal with the attack. The only time Article 5 has ever actually been invoked, and with some difficulty, was by the United States after the 9/11 attacks. And it was a very slow response. And finally they responded, yeah, we'll do something. But it was a very slow response. Partly because they didn't really think it was an attack on the United States from a serious foreign power. They thought it was, it was an attack by Al-Qaeda, which was correct. In any case, Article 5 requires unanimous vote. Every member has to approve. Well, I can guarantee you that there'll be a long line of objections, starting with Greece.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Right.
So the chances are zero that they could get anywhere with Article 5. And anyway, an aggressive action by Turkey doesn't fit the conditions of Article 5 in any sense of the term. So that notion was crazy. So he went up there, they made their pitch under Article 4 for consultation. People listened to, thank you very much, nice consultation. We hope everything will be all right for Turkey. Have a nice day.
But then Erdogan tries to attack the EU and in particular Greece by unloading a whole bunch of refugees from the battles in Idlib.
Oh yeah, I mean, he was doing that at the same time he was asking NATO for consultations. So it was the left hand and the right hand. I mean, he's going to hit you on the head with a hammer and ask for support with the others on the other side. It was a rather foolish move. It also just simply angered all the Europeans who don't need any more refugees right now.
Right.
And certainly not under those kinds of conditions. I mean, if it was controlled or managed some way, it would be one thing. But when you do that sort of thing, and you start flooding people. It's a miserable thing to do to people, by the way. I feel really sorry for these poor refugees who were pushed up to the border and told, you go over there, cross the border. We don't want you anymore. I mean, that's a terrible thing to do to people and families and everything else. It's just lousy. And that kind of misery and his action was really horrible, just plain horrible.
What leverage does Putin have to bring Erdogan into line in Syria?
It's called the Russian army,
So,
Russian Navy, the Russian Air Force.
do you think we would be forced to help him?
I think that what Putin told him was, if you keep it up, I'm fighting you. I mean, he moved two of his most advanced missile ships off the Syrian coast, equipped with Caliber cruise missiles that could take out everything in Turkey you aimed it at.
So basically, it wasn't a diplomatic thing, but he rattled some chains.
I think he rattled very hard. I mean, I suspect that Erdogan was there with his tail between his legs. Yes.
Well, I was wondering. I didn't know if it was some kind of special relationship. You know,
It was special. It was special indeed. I mean, he said you're messing around with my
right.
my country, Syria. You know, you're causing me trouble, and I don't like it.
The question would be: would the United States somehow come to the aid of Turkey if that happened?
No, I don't think so.
That would be kind of.
Look, anything's possible these days. I don't want to rule
Right.
out anything, but what is the United States' interest in this? It's obviously we would love to see the end of the Syrian civil war and a stable settlement reached. By the way, the Russians aren't very different in that regard. I mean, they're not tied inevitably to the future of Assad and his regime. I mean, they've made that fairly clear. They would love to see a settlement too. What the Russian interest is to keep their bases there because they want to be a major player in the Middle East. And that's the only place they can play from right now.
Right.
They have no other bases in the Middle East, and they have, you know, and even that is a kind of high risk. So I think they would, there's a convergence of interest there if the sides all recognize it. The problem is Assad won't cooperate,
Right.
and the Turks won't cooperate, and the Kurds won't cooperate, and the rebels won't cooperate. So the guys on the ground don't want it, right?
No, you don't want it, right?
So the big powers want it, but
Right.
but the players on the ground don't want it. The worst is Assad, I think, because he has scuttled deals in the past
Absolutely.
that the Russians tried to engineer.
I wonder if, you know, this kind of been a passing thought, but with Turkey sort of flexing its muscle and Russia backing it down, in some way, I'm wondering if our government and some of the governments in Europe, is it kind of like, well, let Russia deal with it now?
No, I don't think. I think there was a moment, certainly in the United States, that we thought, well, look, if the Russians and the Turks are finding it hard to get along, this is a chance for us to renew our relationship.
Right. Okay.
And improve their presence in NATO
Right.
and all that
Right.
stuff. That, you know, that was worth about 2 cents. It didn't go anywhere
Right.
because there's nowhere to go. There's simply nowhere to go. What are we going to do?
Right.
We're going to tell the Turks what? I mean, basically, what we ended up, you know, at one point we were going to deliver new weapons to Turkey and we're going to rush stuff to Turkey. And finally they decided, well, look, they're ordering things are in the pipeline. We're not going to cut that off. We're going to continue that, but that's it. So I think they backed down because they realized there was nowhere to go, that it wasn't a very good idea.
Well, we didn't deliver on the shipment of F-35, correct?
Yeah, but that was tied specifically to the Turkish purchase of the S-400 air defense system.
Got you.
So it had nothing to do with this business, whatever. It was a NATO issue that Turkey's acquisition of S-400 would compromise NATO's air defenses.
Got you. Yes.
And therefore, we didn't want them there. And we pleaded with the Turks to take Patriot or something, but not to do that. But Turkey had other fish to fry. They wanted a system for a bunch of reasons, not the least of which is that they wanted to deal with the Russians.
Right. So it seems that I don't know. There's a lot of backdoor conversations that go on between governments, and we don't know if they're positive or negative. But we're going to come back after the break and pick this back up. Just want to remind you that we are live streaming our show on YouTube. You can find it at Netiv, Netiv online, one word, Netiv online, one word. You can watch the show, even the breaks, and get special content. So join us today, Netiv online, and look for Beyond the Matrix. We'll be right back after these messages.
If you say you're live streaming, does it pick up the breaks when we're talking?
Yes. So
I would behave myself. Is that what you're saying?
Well, no, you can still be funny. Just behave yourself.
It's difficult.
Yeah. Well, that's what you have your wife there beside your side for.
That's true. She'll throw something.
Yeah, she'll pull on your collar.
That's why I didn't wear one today.
Yeah, all I have to do is get the look. That's enough to get me. Okay, yes.
Steve, I'm going to pop the North Africa question to you because Erdogan is having his head handed to him by a very odd coalition.
Yeah, I mean,
and a former CIA agent, meaning General Haftar.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a very interesting story.
It's a bunch of, it's very complicated. Who knows what it means? Yeah. But again, he's got the Russians on. He's on the wrong side of the Russians. The Turks.
Oh, he is. Yeah, absolutely.
The U.S. is, I don't know what side you are on.
Well, if you don't know, I'm clueless.
Not clear to me. I think we were back the UN supported government until it falls.
Yeah.
That may happen.
Well, I mean, it's kind of a, one day it is and one day it isn't. I mean, I don't know what the real on the ground situation is. It's very hard to tell.
Yeah. Okay, guys, we're getting ready to go back into the break. Just remind those who are watching online, we appreciate it. Send us your feedback. Let us know what you think. Okay, in 3, 2, and 1.
Welcome back to Beyond the Matrix, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
I'm Rod Bryant, along with Stephen Bryan, our guest, and my co-host, Jerry Gordon. Forgot where we were at, so you can pick it up here.
Steve, Erdogan is having his head handed to him in another arena of war, and that's in Libya. The very strange coalition backing General Haftar, who heads the Libyan National Army and a former CIA agent to boot. So what's going on there?
That's a very good question because I'm not sure what's going on there. The Turks try to support the existing government, put themselves at odds with the Russians, particularly, who were supporting the other side. They started using, instead of using Turkish forces, they started using mercenaries because they were afraid of what might happen to the Turkish forces. And then the mercenaries being shipped in got bombed. So the things, it's a royal screw-up, is what I would call it. I imagine that if the Turks could go home and shut up, they will. It's not going to be successful. It's a kind of place you just don't want to inject yourself unless you really think you can win fast. And I don't think you can win fast. I don't even know what winning means in that context. You know, they cooked up a deal. The Turkish interest was largely to make a deal on the territorial seas in the area because they wanted to cut out Greece and Cyprus and Israel, for that matter, from being able to exploit these Mediterranean resources for oil and natural gas, and particularly to set up a pipeline that would flow into Greece and Italy. So they made this crazy claim that between Turkey and Libya, they controlled the whole thing, 100%. And no one accepted it. No one accepted it. But that was the great coup, if you want to call it that. But it creates another kind of tension that has to be dealt with.
Okay, the Israel Air Force appears to be attacking chemical weapons depots inside Syria and perhaps in the process killing Iranian generals. How bad is the...
I'm not sure about that. I think they were trying to go after missile warehouses and things like that. Whether they were also storing chemical weapons in those places, I'm just not certain. I'm not anybody's certain about it, actually. There have been reports that the Syrians have started up using some chemical weapons again. Mostly, I think, chlorine, because that was one of those substances that wasn't banned effectively by the deal that was struck on the sarin gas, which just covered nerve gas. So it's possible that was in the warehouse, that that's what they bombed. But I don't know if that would be Israel's priority. I think Israel's priority would be the missiles.
Let me ask you, how is chlorine delivered? I'm not familiar with.
The way they've been doing it, as I understand it, is largely dumping them in barrels out of helicopters.
Just powdered chlorine?
No, it's liquid.
Liquid.
Wow.
Yeah, just bursting, in different neighborhoods, wow, and making people sick. That's what I understand. And they also have something called barrel bombs that they roll out of the back of helicopters. The same thing. Those are explosive, filled with nails and other glass and other stuff to kill people. It's nasty. I mean, it's nasty. There's been less of that recently, I think. But that's because there are less Syrian helicopters.
Yeah. Jerry, go ahead.
Is Turkey and Russia in league with trying to take over those oil fields we talked earlier about in Syria?
I think it's hard to say that that's the case. I don't know. I think that it would be very difficult for Turkey to try and do that, because that would be a general war with the Syrians at that point. I don't think they would do that. I think the Turkish interest is up along the border to control that whole area if they could. That's their main interest. And to drive the Kurds out, which is, of course, the Turkish fixation. That's my opinion, but there may be other opinions.
Recently, after this coronavirus incident sort of broke loose, as we've seen, we're right in the middle of it. Israel has really been on the forefront of developing a virus test and vaccines, et cetera. Why is Israel on the forefront of this and not any other advanced country? Maybe even
others are. I mean, let's be fair. There's a lot of work being done all over the world.
Right.
United States, for sure. Australia, China actually is working very hard on this. Japan. There's a great deal of work being done on this. Israel, of course, has a world-class medical system and medical research, which is as good as anywhere. They also, up in the northern Galilee, had a research institute that was working for a long time, 4 years or more, on a coronavirus analog that is attacking chickens. And they came up with essentially an oral vaccine against this version of coronavirus for chickens. It's not exactly the same as the coronavirus that's hitting humans, but because it's an avian version of coronavirus, but it's fairly close. It's close enough that the Israelis believe that with some tweaking and changes, it can be adapted as a human coronavirus vaccine. So it's very promising, and I was excited by it because they had been working on the vaccine well ahead of other people, and that gave them an advantage.
Right,
that was
right.
Considerable.
I would like to take a shift. We've probably got about 4 minutes left in this last segment to give a sort of an overview analysis of the damaging effects on our country's economy, countries in general economy, our relationship with each other. Give us the down and the upside, if there is an upside.
Look, I think we have to learn how to cope with this kind of crisis, because this won't be the first or the last. But we also have to deal with it responsibly and without hysterics. I'm particularly concerned about the press,
Absolutely,
which has been exaggerating, and the number of people sick from this disease is not very high. That doesn't mean it's not terrible for those who are sick. And in some places, it's very extensive, like Italy, for example. But in other places, let's say South Korea, it seems to not only be under control, but declining very rapidly. And even in China, it's declining now. So I think we have to take a responsible approach. I think the president's proposals make a lot of sense for us in the United States. We are a well-organized country, and if we do what is recommended so far, I think we'll go through it okay. The downside of all this is it's going to make some economic problems. It already has. I mean, when you start closing businesses and transportation hubs and all the rest, it's going to impact the economy in a negative way. But I think the thing that we should always keep in mind is this is a transitory thing. The economy will recover. The stock market will recover. If we don't panic and if we behave sensibly, things will return to normal sooner rather than later. And that's even without the possibility of medications, which are emerging now that will help control coronavirus. And of course, the bigger picture, the vaccines, which will emerge a little later, that will make sure we don't get it again. I mean, it's like a flu shot.
right?
But right now, the number of deaths in the United States, and even in Israel, are far fewer than from coronavirus. I should say the number of deaths from coronavirus are far fewer than we got
Right.
from the flu.
Right.
And said it backwards. So, we're not in any, we know what we're up against. We don't want everybody to get sick.
Right.
We're trying to do measures to prevent that. But, and I think we will, if we keep our discipline, we'll be fine. The places that are at most risk are the ones that lack discipline and lack good organization and lack
Right.
effective governments.
Right.
Iran is a classic case. I think you're going to see similar problems in Iraq. Certainly in Africa, they're having problems.
Yes.
And in places where there's a culture of not liking the government very much,
Or trusting the government.
or trusting the government. And this is classic Italy,
Yes.
where Italians have for 500 years avoided the government at all costs, whatever government that was.
Right. Right.
And they don't pay taxes, and they don't do this, and they don't do that. They do what they want. Well, that got them in trouble this time.
Right. Right.
So discipline, organization, responsibility, and keep the panic levels down. You don't need 200,000 rolls of toilet paper in your house. You don't need enough hand wipes to wipe the whole world.
Wash your hands.
We'll produce enough. I mean, there's no chance that we won't produce enough. So just be patient.
Right.
We'll get there.
That's good advice. Good advice. I mean, we've seen the effect around here. I'm sure you guys, where you're at, of people panicking and buying up all the toilet paper and water, and which is actually the least two things that you need if you have coronavirus. I just don't understand. It blows my mind. But I do understand that it comes from a culture of people who are not prepared mentally or spiritually for any type of thing, and they just panic. And I've been telling people for years, just be prepared in general for anything, and you'll be okay whenever it comes. And that's
exactly. And unless people understand, the less that understand, the worse it is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We got to go. We've had a great time with you, Stephen. Hopefully come back here soon. And we'll say shalom, shalom from Beyond the Matrix. We'll chat with you guys at the same time next week.
Okay.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent. Excellent.
Okay.
So very good.
Steve, has your congregation essentially shut down services?
Yeah. We have 3 people who tested positive.
Honey?
3.
Wow.
Tell them why.
And I'll explain the story. We had one that came to services last Shabbat.
Yep.
Not this Shabbat past, but the week past,
Right.
prior one. And that person was tested positive after that. So people that were near or contact with that person have been advised. And then there was a shiva for a very fine family here in our synagogue, where they lost their mother. And apparently 2 people tested positive from that shiva.
Oh, wow.
So everybody that attended it are now in 2 weeks of
That's
isolation.
almost identical to what happened here in Houston. It was
Is that right? Yeah.
one guest came from out of town, was hosted by,
I think that's what happened at our show, exactly.
and then all of a sudden, when what happened is a young girl in the house tested positive, and the guy went and got tested. He was a carrier,
Mm-hmm.
and so they shut everything down. So
Well, everything around here is shut down anyway. I mean, all the synagogues.
Talk radio.
I'm Rod Bryant. Go ahead.
All the synagogues have agreed to close for now. So there are no minions. There's no services. There's no school. They're all shut.
Wow.
For the time, for at least the next 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And then they'll reevaluate. I think that's probably right.
Yeah, I think so too. Giving it a shot to see if we.
And for us elderly people, we're advised to stay away from crowds and stuff like that.
And the best thing is I don't like crowds, so that helps.
Like anybody.
Give me an excuse to be an introvert.
That is called, from the Greek, agoraphobia.
Agoraphobia. Okay, yes.
Hey,
that's
Jerry,
it.
where did you get the story about Israel bombing chemical weapon sites in the
Came out of the news.
I don't believe it. I don't think so.
Well, then the answer is, where did the news originate? Was it some...
Well, Israel never reports the news about anything.
No. It didn't.
So somebody else is putting it out for whatever reason they're putting it out. Let's put it that way. But I would be really surprised because it's not their priority.
Bit of a story about the hotspot in New Rochelle, New York. A friend of mine is, in fact, a member of the Young Israel congregation that apparently was the genesis of this stuff.
Yeah, it was.
And basically, what does it tell you as an author of a book on security for shuls and other, religious observance platforms about what we do about this stuff?
Well, I've got a little video I've just put out and an article I put out saying, empty synagogues still have to be guarded and protected.
Right.
So that's first thing. I think the situation, that's a very closed community up there in New Rochelle.
I know
So
it
it's
well.
easy, huh?
I know it well.
Yeah, so it's easy for things to spread. Because people are in very close contact.
Correct.
I guess that's also the reason why that Iran is having the issue they have, because the Headshed group is a close-knit group of people.
Exactly, and that's
Yeah.
right where it is. And I imagine it's in the mosques pretty heavily in Iran, too.
I find it interesting. The guy that died from it was the minister of health. He went to prove that it was nothing by licking the gates of the.
Was he the guy that did that?
Yeah, he was the guy that licked the gates,
Jesus.
came down and died from it. So that's good proof. Okay.
Well, one of these imams, it's a very funny story. It says that you can cure this, not a problem. You get violet oil and you rub it on your asshole. A lot of people in Iran are getting violet oil.
I know. In India, they're drinking cow urine.
And they're drinking cow urine. Well, all the power to them.
Yeah, I'll pass.
The cow urine business, I guess.
I'll stick with a glass of milk. That's as close I'm going to get to it. Okay, we're going to go. And Jerry, stick around so we can knock out the other segment.
We will.
Take care.
Okay,
Bye.
take care,
Bye.
Steve. Okay,
Okay, go ahead. Bye.
no, go ahead. No, go ahead.
No.
Just send me the link for their.
Oh, yeah, we will.
for
We will.
YouTube. Okay.
And kindly give our best to your bride who's standing by.
Yes.
She's happy to receive. She also has.
Bye, guys.
Wait. She's circulating a book review she did.
Book by Tevi Troy on what's the government's responsibility in cases like this and what's our responsibility.
Oh, that's
We reviewed it almost 3 years ago, and it is the most appropriate thing for today that you will ever see.
You know,
That's the book.
Shoshana, what's the title?
The book is called "Shall We Wake the President?"
that sounds interesting. Who is the writer?
The guy who wrote it is a man named Tevi Troy, who at one point was a deputy, was an undersecretary, I think, at HHS in the Reagan administration. And it's a historical book. It talks about enormous nationwide problems that we've had through history and how presidents
Send it
responded.
to them.
That's
Jerry,
really,
you're going to get it. You get everything I write, right, Jerry?
Yep.
Okay, so you're going to get it. It's coming out.
excellent.
imminently. We reviewed it for the magazine, but I went back and looked at it, and it is absolutely responsive on the question of what is and is not the government's job and what is your job.
This is good. You know, we probably should do a segment of that.
Well, get her.
You should do a segment
That's right.
of that. Whether
Right.
you do it with me or you do it with Tevi Troy, but you should do a segment of that because
This is really good stuff. Yes.
So
wait,
can-
give me your email address. Jerry's already getting it. I'll send it to you.
Okay, good. Rod Bryant, RODBRYANT @gmail.com.
Okay.
So can we see Shoshana for the screen?
Can you? No, I have no makeup on.
I
I mean, just because we're in self-isolation doesn't mean I have to go show
I
up.
didn't wear mine either. I should have used that erase. That's
Yeah,
a great product.
I didn't
Well-
put makeup on, and I'm here.
Jean sends her best, and believe it or not, you're still on our Schulz Mishaberic list.
Works, doesn't it?
It sure does.
Yes, and I still appreciate it, I have to tell you.
All right.
All right, ciao, ciao. Talk to you later.
We'll see you.
Bye-bye.